Hi, in this video I will be introducing Kahneman and try to explain what question he's actually answering. What topic is he trying to deal with here? So usually the focus of philosophy of science is on research designs, on what a theory actually is, what methods we should use, and what social world we are actually interested in. What we're doing here with the inclusion of this text is to say, well, we should also consider the human beings that both carry out the research, so human beings are researchers, but it's also human beings that we do economic research on. So who are these human beings and what characterizes them? That's the essence of what we are trying to go for here. Is we'll be trying to understand what human rationality actually is. You might have heard the term bias, that we human beings are biased. What does that mean, and where do these biases come from? And then also, why are these important? And this links to the next lesson about Kuhn as well. So where does irrationality of thinking come from? We'll be getting a sense of system 1 and system 2 in the next video. And then why do we have these cognitive biases that you've heard about? And what implications does this have? I'll try to explain what this means by providing a couple of examples. So this is a classical example that behavioral economics is basically all about. So here you see a question that says, check the box if you want to participate in the pension scheme, or whatever sort of organ donation, or whatever the question could be. And then here you have check the box if you don't want to participate in the pension scheme. The content of the question is the same. Do you want to participate, yes or no? So in that sense, whatever you sort of do, whether you click the box or not, it's answering the same question. It's trying to get to the same essence. But it turns out that we get quite different answers depending on how we actually frame this question. And this doesn't quite match with this idea of Homo economicus, this classical economic idea about fairly rational human beings that process information and then sort of express their preference according to that. So this is just one example, and I'll provide a few more that is meant to illustrate that we human beings are not as rational as we might like to think ourselves to be. We should be answering, all human beings, if they were rational, should answer this question in the same way. The same number of people that, sort of the reverse number of people that tick the box here should then not tick the box in the next one. So, but it is the case, and we see lots of examples, and Richard Taylor has basically got a Nobel Prize in economics of demonstrating this. So the question we are asking here, that we are focusing on here with Kahneman, is where does this sort of seeming irrationality, where does this irrationality seem to stem from? And there are basically two kinds of answers we could provide. It's either because emotions are taking over. It's simply because we are emotional when we should be rational. Another angle could be, well, our brains are just not working. Our brains are just inefficient. That's very crudely put two kinds of responses we could provide to the question, where does this irrationality come from? And an example such as this one might sort of fit this idea of an emotional being. So this is a very classical example. Many others like this you probably know about. There was a football game going on, and it was a very intense game, and it ended out in a fist fight. Fist fight erupted. There were further injuries on both the Princeton and Dartmouth side. And then what was done was that there were two psychologists that took videos of this game and showed them to students on each campus. And each student was supposed to note how this all happened and what sort of led to the fist fight, and try to find out who was responsible for it. And I'm sure you're not surprised about that, Princeton students generally saw twice as many Dartmouth violations as the other way around. So they were watching the same video, but they ended up with different conclusions about who was responsible for starting these fistfights, who had actually sort of made the most violations. So even though there is sort of an objective reality that we could film, we have different opinions on it. And I think here we might tend to think, well, it's just because they have emotional attachments to one of the football teams, so they didn't really pay as much attention as they should do. But when we then consider this example, which is an example Kahneman has used often, we might become a little bit more confused about Why are we being this irrational? So imagine an experiment, two different groups that both get the question, what percentage of UN members are African countries? But before each of these groups then answered the question, a wheel of fortune was spun right before them. And either it stopped at 10 or it stopped at 65. And in the group where it stopped at 10, the mean answer to the question of what percent of UN members are African countries was 25%. While in the one where the number stopped at 65, the mean answer was 45%. So this is an example where there clearly does not seem to be any emotional attachment involved. We don't sort of care about the number on the Wheel of Fortune or the number of African countries in sort of a very deep way. But it seems to be the case that when we see a very low number, we end up answering a lower number than if we see a higher number. So maybe there is something about each group of people. They sort of know that the answer is somewhere between 25 and 45, but depending on how the question and answers is asked, we get different answers. And there are a few more examples we can show of this. This is also an example that Kahneman is using. So think of this person, Linda, here. You can stop the video and just read it also if you want to. So Linda is this 31-year-old single, outspoken, very bright woman, majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and even participated in anti-nuclear demonstrations. Now, which alternative is the most probable? Which of these three descriptions is likely to fit Linda? You can pause the video, reflect on it. But the key thing really to note here is if we're thinking about probability, well, Linda is a bank teller in this scenario. In this scenario, she's both a bank teller and active in the feminist movement. Well, in any case, the bank teller angle is most likely. You can sort of see it in a Venn diagram here, that anytime she's a feminist bank teller, she's also a bank teller. So the answer you should give is Linda is a bank teller, but it turns out, and Kahneman has done this question, carried out this exercise in many places around the world, fancy universities, with statisticians, with students, with people in general, and people tend to answer this is a bank teller active in the feminist movement. He uses this example in the book as well. So we again, this could sort of be an indication of a brain that is not 100% rational, because if we were thinking of pure probabilities, the question is really not that difficult, but that's not what our brain tends to do. You'll see more of these kinds of examples throughout these two videos, but it really gets to the question of where does this irrationality of thinking come from, which he talks about here on page 8. And he says that social scientists in the 70s have broadly accepted two ideas. Either, for one, people are generally irrational, their thinking is normally sound. And second, emotions such as fear, affection, hatred, etc. can make people depart from rationality. So the basic idea is that we are sort of information processing machines, just like a computer, and emotions might sort of make our brains go astray. So whatever sort of flawed answers we have given to the 3-4 examples we've seen here in this video, it's because of emotional issue. But as he then says, he's trying to challenge these assumptions about human nature and the brain. And they're trying to document systematic errors in the thinking of normal people. And we trace these errors to the design of the machinery of cognition, that is our thinking, rather than to the corruption of thought by emotion. So the idea is to sort of make us understand that we should not think ourselves as these Homo economicus, the information processing machine that is rational as long as emotions don't intervene. This is the key idea that he's trying to go against in the book, but also that he's then trying to promote, that we have these systematic errors and it's a cognitive issue. It's a rationality issue. He's developed, as you can see, he wrote some of the first papers here in the 70s, and he's since then developed his work. He's a psychologist and then got the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2002, and then also wrote a book called Thinking Fast and Slow in 2011, which has really made him quite famous. It's an excellent book, and it's the one that we're reading a couple of chapters from. You can also see, we sort of look at the number of times that the word behavioral economics, so how people actually behave, So what is people's actually economic behavior? And if we see how often this term is used in economics papers, you can see that there really something was going on around the year 2000 and onwards. It's just used a lot more. So we are more interested in the economics literature about how do people actually behave rather than just assuming this homo economicus that is rational and focused on monetary incentives. So that's the question that Kahneman is dealing with here is, and this is why we're drawing upon this in this philosophy of science course. Yes, we want to know about research designs and methods and what a theory actually is and what social world are we even doing research about. But we can't forget the people that are doing the research and the people that we actually do the research on. What are these human beings? And a typical classical economic assumptions, this is by an article by Spence, who once won the Nobel Prize. He wrote in one of his articles, everyone is reacting rationally to the market situation. That was the assumptions when they were analyzing data on how humans behaved. And Kahneman is then basically saying we should not think of the brain as this information processing machine. We have two different systems, two different cognitive systems, two different thinking systems, and this is what he's then trying to explain. How does the human mind actually work? That's what systems 1 and system 2 is about. That's what is being presented in the book chapters, and that's what I will be getting into in the next video.